Hello and welcome to the third Virtual Thought Leadership event. I'm Becky Hyde. I'm the Senior Executive of the Corporate and Overseas Portfolios at Medibank, and I'd like to thank you all for attending today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet. For me, I'm here on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us here today. Very excited to have you all join us today, and we're hoping that this series particularly will help you and your teams and organisations to work better and to ultimately live better. Today we're joined by two very special guests for an important conversation about mentally healthy workplaces. We've all experienced how the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way we live, work and communicate. We've been faced with remote working, isolation from our friends and families, juggling children in and out of homeschooling, and all on top of the anxiety that we have around COVID-19 itself. It's more important than ever to ensure everyone's mental health is top of mind. We need to be able to recognise the signs of mental ill health and to offer the right support to our people. With this as context, there's a few questions. How do we best approach mental health conversations with our teams? How do we foster psychologically safe workplaces, even when we're working from home? And how can we normalise the conversation around mental health to ensure people feel safe and secure to ask for support? I'd now like to introduce our panellists to join me and kick off our discussion. Georgie Harman has been the CEO of Beyond Blue since 2014. She was the former Deputy CEO at the National Mental Health Commission and was responsible for Commonwealth policy and investment in mental health, suicide prevention, tobacco control, substance misuse, cancer and chronic disease, and that was at the Department of Health from 2006 to 2012. Welcome, Georgie. It's great to have you here today. Georgie, I'd like to just give you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and tell us how you found yourself working in the mental health space.
Thanks, Becky. Well, look, I'm joining you from lockdown in Melbourne. My name's Georgie. I'm the CEO of Beyond Blue. My favourite job ever in the world. You know, it's the best job, and it's a real privilege to lead an organisation like Beyond Blue. Look, it's been really tough. You know, we've all been working remotely for coming up 6 months now. And I must admit, you know, personally, it's been a real challenge at times, both from a leadership perspective, but also personally too. I live alone. My partner lives in Sydney. All of my family are overseas, and just not knowing when we're going to see each other again is a really tough concept. But you know, to be frank, I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a job, and I have a job at the moment that's probably got more purpose than it's ever had before. So I feel very, very lucky. We are working incredibly hard. The community is turning to Beyond Blue and other organisations in the mental health sector like we've never seen. So we're having a deeper and wider conversation about mental health and wellbeing across the community. You know, no one has not been affected in some way. And I think, you know, it has, I think, deepened the conversation, which I think is a really positive thing. But unfortunately, the pandemic is affecting certain groups much harder. You know, some groups are doing it much tougher than others. So if you've got a history of a mental health issue or condition, if you've got a history of self-harm or suicidal thinking or behaviours, if you live in poverty, or you're in difficult economic circumstances, if you've got insecure work, young people are really doing it tough as they kind of try and face into a future that's really, really uncertain, and a lot of those kind of anchors that keep them on the straight and narrow are kind of a little bit wobbly at the moment. So we've had to really think about all these things and really come back to our values and what we're here to achieve as an organisation. We've had to completely adjust many of our business practices. We've had to go back to basics in terms of our own transformation agenda. And we've had to ensure service continuity, which, I think we've been able to do. And unfortunately, we've been given great support by governments and by corporates, including Medibank, who gave us a really significant donation last financial year, at the end of last financial year, and also individuals. And that's keeping us going, and we're so incredibly grateful because we need that support more than ever. So there's just a little bit of a summary of what we're up to.
Thanks so much, Georgie, and thanks for sharing your personal experience too. And we look forward to hearing a bit more about that moving forward. And there's no doubt there's never been a more important time for Beyond Blue services in the community. So thanks for all that you're doing for all of us. I'd now like to introduce Nathan Thompson. Nathan is a former Australian rules footballer playing football for Hawthorn Football Club and North Melbourne. In 2004, Nathan spoke publicly about his expression of depression, and since then has been an ambassador for Beyond Blue. He's played an important role in raising community awareness about the prevalence of this illness. So please join me in welcoming Nathan. Nathan, I'll hand over to you for 1 to 2 minutes just to provide an introduction to yourself and to tell us what it was like for you being in a sport that is very masculine and finding yourself suffering from depression, and how that journey was for you in coming out and speaking out about it.
Thanks very much, Becky, and can I firstly say once again what a pleasure it is to have this platform to share my story and also to share the importance of Beyond Blue in these sort of environments. So I do appreciate being on board with Medibank on this occasion. Mine is an interesting story. Young person, I grew up in a town called Kyneton, where I find myself now back in working the car industry. Made my way down to the AFL through a lot of hard work, but as a very naive person at the time, I probably was struggling with mental health as a teenager and leading into my AFL career, but was unaware of some of the signs that we're showing and some of the emotional issues I was dealing with at the time. I then took those with me in a pretty high pressurised environment. The AFL environment, you probably feel sorry for them at the moment, like many of the people in Melbourne or in the city area who are in lockdown. A lot of the guys now obviously being in lockdown themselves up in Queensland are in a very similar situation. So what I found myself in was a situation where I joined the AFL in 1997 as a 19-year-old young guy who thought I was about to live out my dream. But one of the main things I found was that I was on a massive roller coaster and something that I wasn't coping with very well. And I always blamed it on AFL football and the pressure that arose with the AFL. I'd find myself some weeks feeling like I had a cape on, that I was capable of anything. I had so much energy, and that may last for a couple of weeks. And then unfortunately that would leave me, and I'd spend a month where I really was struggling to lift my legs. The environment within the footy industry is very supportive, and certainly that's something I would say now. I think the AFL Players Association, even now further down the track, the AFL Coaches Association, they do have the players' health and best interests at heart, and the support networks that they have put together now with the help of Beyond Blue are very, very good. The problem that I would say, and this is a challenge for a lot, it's not just football, but a lot of environments within workplaces, is that the person who is struggling with mental illness at the time, and this was very much prevalent with me, is their perception of what is going on with their own health is not actually accurate. And they don't actually necessarily know what's going on with them, yet their coping mechanism is just to try and get through day to day. And that would mean that there's a lot of fear involved with that, a lot of guilt that's involved with that. And I know for myself, the fear was an important part which played a huge role in me struggling. As a footballer, a lot of times you're year to year. What else do you have apart from football that you can actually earn a living, support a young family? And if you retire or if you are incapable of playing, you are then without that job or that consistent earning behind you to live day to day. And from that perspective, I think without knowing it, I was hiding from the reality that I needed help and I needed support. And in fairness to the club, they were great. Like, they would support me as a person who they thought was having just ups and downs with my football career and whether I could get a kick on the weekend. But unbeknownst to anyone, I was in a lot more dire straits as far as my health was concerned. Really struggled sleeping at night, having negative suicidal thoughts, excuse me, to the point where, you know, driving home at night, I'd go back to the country, like to Kyneton, and driving it home at night, unfortunately, I was thinking similar things to what happened to Danny Frawley, and I think that just shows you how dangerous it is. After 20 years, though, I certainly received help in 2004. I won't take too much longer. Beyond Blue were involved. I owe a great debt of gratitude to them and a lot of other health people that supported me to get back onto my feet. And to be honest, though, it's been a journey since then. It's not something that I've just been able to put a silver bullet in and forget about. It's something that I deal with month to month, day to day, and certainly something that I try to remember throughout my work as a leader here at a local Toyota dealership. So made a decision a few years ago to come regionally. I'm here now. I really love that freer lifestyle. And we're very fortunate at the moment. Number one, fortunate to have a job. And number two, we do understand people in the city are doing it a lot tougher than us.
Thanks so much, Nathan. And I might just pick up on something you were saying there, because I think it's fascinating hearing you talk about the fear and also maybe the lack of recognition that you are suffering from depression. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? So how do we, no, that's okay. We as leaders, if people are suffering from mental health yet they don't recognise they're suffering from mental health, how can we help in that situation?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one you mentioned there, Becky, because that for me is the hardest piece, is that from a person who struggles with a mental health issue, depending what that is, if you actually are unaware, firstly, that you are struggling with that and not just the pressure of work, then, you know, communication-wise, you're fearful then that if you bring up you're struggling with work, are you a chance to lose your job and those sort of things. If it's something that you do know what you've got, that actually then brings the stigma side of it into how do people perceive me? Will work get rid of me because they worry about my long-term longevity? Are they going to have to pay me compensation because I can't continue to work? So from those perspectives, there are a lot of fear that's involved in that. The key component for me is twofold. Number one, the raising of awareness around mental health has come a long way, and the importance of people understanding that the answer to it is actually communication. If you try to deal with it yourself without getting support, if you try to deal with it yourself by coping mechanisms such as alcohol, illicit drugs, and a lot of people choose different ways to try and cope. Unfortunately, that is not the answer. The answer is to actually communicate with close people around you, your networks, and especially at work. I think we've come a long way in business now where businesses understand that their assets are people. It's not necessarily, most have got a good product, but the difference at great businesses is the people that are involved. And businesses are on the front foot these days to support their people to be the best they can be, to support their teams to be the best they can be. So from my perspective, that comes from understanding that you're a valued person in the business and you need to communicate with the right person within your business that you need support and what's going on, and then what's the best way to move forward to make sure you're healthy and productive for the business. And then, of course, it's healthy and productive at home for your own reasons. The other part to it is from a employer or a leadership perspective is how you actually communicate with the people in your team. It's not necessarily the case that every person has an issue, is struggling, but the most important part is that you have open dialogue and communication with each individual And even more important in these scenarios, that you do have more interaction from a team. So platforms like this one, Zoom, they're wonderful. You know, you can get a whole team together and have conversations over it. Now, that can be a coffee conversation. It doesn't have to be a work meeting. I think that is a really important part to making people still feel a part of their network, and also giving you the chance to open up with people, whether it's in a team or individually, to find out how they're going. And I think an important part of that as a leader is telling personal stories as well. So my major thing I'm passionate about is communication. You know, I certainly put aside the fear of talking a long time ago, and I want people to know my personal story, because that actually gives them the comfortable or the confidence to open up to me.
I think you're absolutely right, Nathan. I think you make an amazing point about leaders also showing their vulnerabilities. You know, as Georgie was speaking about her struggles with coronavirus and being home alone, and hearing that from leaders is really important, so that other people feel that they can talk about things and how they're feeling as well, and how things are affecting them. Thank you for that. Georgie and Nathan, can you tell us a bit about the impact the COVID-19 crisis has had on you personally? And Georgie, particularly, can you talk about the work Beyond Blue is doing in this space to help support the community? I might hand to you first, Georgie.
Sure. And can I just say, Nathan, thank you for everything that you do. I think the world's a better place for people like you. So thank you. So look, we've been very, very busy, and I guess my team has just been, you know, magnificent. They really are working incredibly hard under really challenging circumstances, because they're dealing with all of the, you know, the kind of juggle of life and work as well as everyone else. So we were given some funding by the federal government back at Easter to actually stand up a dedicated coronavirus support service. And we stood that service up in 8 days, which is not a sustainable way to go about working, but, you know, 3 months work in 8 days. But it was necessary to really move fast and create a minimum viable product, if you like, that really we wanted to get out there so that people had somewhere to go. So we took a digital first approach to that. It's got multiple channels, because we know that people like to seek support in different ways. So there is a dedicated coronavirus digital site, which content is updated every single week, and we update content to actually reflect what people are going through at that particular point. So it's changed massively from the beginning, very early days of the pandemic, where people, quite frankly, just had extreme health anxiety. They were terrified of this virus. They were terrified of dying. We were seeing these terrible images from overseas. They were terrified about their families, you know, their loved ones. And as the pandemic has shifted, we started to see a lot more concerns about isolation and loneliness, disconnection, a lot more job stress and job uncertainty, a lot more family stress, and a lot more issues, unfortunately, like, you know, family violence, drug and alcohol issues, gambling issues, that kind of thing. What we've seen in more recent weeks, and obviously it's adjusted because of the situation in Victoria, we're now 2/3 of all contacts to our support services are coming from Victoria. We've started to see just this general sense of exhaustion and fatigue. Like, people are just really tired, cognitively and I think physically. So we've had to adjust our content to kind of meet those different needs, and as I said, weekly updates. We've got our mental health counsellors that are available 24/7, completely free, confidentially, on the phone. And we rapidly built a new workforce, especially trained in how to deal with situations that people are facing through the pandemic. But we also have web chat with a counsellor. So some people prefer to actually, you know, have a web chat as opposed to hearing a voice on the end of the phone. But importantly, there's another channel, which is our peer online support forums, where you actually just register. It's a safe, moderated space where you can actually share your experiences and get tips on, you know, how other people are coping, what helps them in a really safe environment online. And that is the biggest channel of support. That has been the most preferred channel for support for people. The number of click-throughs to those forums are just unbelievable. Just give you some sense of numbers. We've had over 770,000 visits to that digital service since it's launched in early April. We've seen about a 68% increase in contacts to the counselling service in June and July. That's dipping slightly again now, but every time there is another lockdown or something, we see it spike again. And we've seen 1.3 million engagements with those online forums in a matter of months. So, people are turning to us, which I think is a really good thing. And our key message to people is there is no eligibility criteria for this service. Just jump online, pick up the phone, jump into those forums, and don't wait. Don't wait until things get really bad. It's never too early to seek support. And as Nathan says, there's nothing to be ashamed about. This is something that we're all feeling, we're all going through, we're all touched by in some way. And some people are doing it obviously tougher than others. So, check out that service. Make sure that your staff and teams and families are aware of it because, that's why we're here.
That's amazing statistics, Georgie. Thanks for sharing those with us. And it's so incredible to hear that 2/3 of that dialogue is coming from Victoria at the moment, which is obviously a reflection of, the lockdown stage that we're at. I really like that peer-to-peer engagement because I think you're absolutely right. We're all feeling it. And I think to know you're not alone, even though people know we're all experiencing similar things, I think sometimes you think you are alone in the feelings you're having. So thanks for sharing that peer-to-peer line. So you talked about burnout, and I know through talking to my team, fatigue is definitely setting in. How do you work with your team on that fatigue, and what strategies and tactics do you have around that?
Yeah, look, it's a constant work in progress, and I think you've got to really be led by what your teams are saying they need from you. We've got all the usual supports and probably a lot more than many other organisations given the kind of organisation we are. So, we've got our EAP, we've got, flexible working and special leave provisions. We've got access to mental health nurses on staff. We've got access to teachers actually who work in our schools program who are holding sessions with staff with kids who are really struggling with balancing schooling from home, and we have regular sort of drop-in and group chats, obviously using technology with teams who are with one of our mental health nurses who are actually really helping them to kind of go through the different stages that we're all going through from that exhaustion. How do you actually deal with the cognitive load? What are the kind of self-care strategies that you need that can be really helpful? Yeah. But again, I think just bringing staff together from across the organisations in those kinds of spaces, and having a cross-section of the organisation attend those kinds of online, discussions really sends a signal that, everybody's feeling this. I'm feeling it. I talk regularly to my staff about the time, I've had a really tough weekend. That weekend felt like it was a month. But here's what I ended up doing to kind of, get into a routine and look after myself. We've got, and I think the thing that's working really well is those informal supports. And lots of them are driven by staff. We just need to kind of create the environments for them to actually set up their own support networks. So we've got the Dogs of Beyond Blue. We've got the Dancing with Myself online group. We've got the
love it.
Daily Queen. And I think what I've really learned from this, and it was a mistake I made in my communication very early on, was people's experiences are highly contextual. People live alone. People's families are overseas. People are living in crowded households. People are dealing with cranky partners. People are juggling, homeschooling. Some people live with, existing mental health conditions. So you've got to be really nuanced in your conversation and really, in your communication and really inclusive, and not forget about that. One of the things that we're really struggling with at the moment is getting staff to take leave. And, you know, from me and the executive down, we're really trying to model that. And I'm taking regular days off. So, you know, just even if I am just wandering around my neighbourhood and, you know, doing a jigsaw puzzle, it's a break away from the screen. And but what I found is the staff are sick and tired of me preaching to them. So I'm asking staff to actually, when they do take a day off, actually tell their own stories on our channels. You know, we've also got home office heroes. So we've got staff who record videos of, you know, how they've set themselves up at you know, work at home and what their days look like. And so I think that storytelling by staff, not just from people like me, is actually incredibly powerful.
That's great, Georgie. Thanks so much. And Nathan, you've got a family of 3 children. You're in the country. You've just come out of stage 4 lockdown and had things lifted a bit more. You're at work. Can you tell me a bit about the COVID-19 crisis and how it's affected you personally, and what strategies have you used to deal with it?
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, one of the one of the toughest things, I think, has been the isolation from other people. And in standard times, pick up a phone, meet at the cafe, meet at the pub, all of those sort of things. But all of a sudden, that we've all been isolated from our friends. And the thing for me is it's become Groundhog Day. So every day we go to work and we do our time. And I've been very fortunate. I've been at work. We've been very lucky that in the car industry in regional areas we are deemed as an essential service. So I am getting some stimulation away from that home environment or the home office. But what is happening, though, is normally your work environment is quite a repetitive place. Now what I'm finding is you go from the repetitive place of work to a repetitive place at home as well. So, yes, I've got a young family who are probably struggling with the homeschooling scenario, and my wife is struggling becoming a teacher for the first time and managing the kids for 24 or 12 hours a day. But what we're finding is we've lost a bit of that personal stimulation that I think is so important for people. So up here in Kyneton, I'm heavily involved in the community. It's one of the things I'm most proud of, is being involved in local sport. My kids play sport. I coach. I'm involved there, whether I'm running water or running the boundary. And it's a great way to get out, get some fresh air, get some exercise and be involved in the wider community. We're a small community. The other part is I am involved as the senior coach for the last year and a half, which I am going to step aside from for some different reasons. But I have been a leader for our local football club. The challenges that are there is that not only have I sort of been challenged by how do I keep these guys engaged with the football club and also keeping themselves connected and healthy, but I've also found that it has been very hard to actually communicate with them because I've lost that avenue. You've got 40-something guys, young people under 18s, also the senior guys as well, that I can no longer communicate with as a group and in a single situation at the football club, which is quite achievable. Whereas now to try and talk to that many people across single platforms is nearly impossible for me. And I suppose for myself, that's probably something which is a learning thing for me. Is actually, I'm not a technical wizard by any stretch. I really struggle with it. But working out different platforms, like Georgie mentioned, but maybe in a local space where we can create these small groups, we can communicate better, and then we can help each other and support each other, where this is why we're talking right now and why we're having this discussion. It's about how do we support ourselves and other people to stay healthy through this environment. So that's definitely been something which has hit myself and my sort of connection with the local community, but even with my own home environment. I mentioned that sort of lack of stimulation. Your kids desperately need stimulation, and when they're really stuck at home day in and day out, there's only, they're allowed to go for a walk and whatnot. That becomes a very frustrating situation for them. And the ripple effects that come from that through the challenge of actually, managing young kids and parenting young kids as most of us know, it's challenging at the best of times. So then that has a bit of an effect on the family. Unfortunately, my wife lost her job. She was working at a local solicitor 3 days a week, and the impact that has on her mental health, which then is, I suppose, extra that she's now with the kids all the time and getting that frustration, everything just builds up. And if there's a lack of communication in the house, and I get back to that, my favourite word, communication, if there's a lack of time, especially between husband and wife, where we try and find quiet times to actually sit with each other and talk about our day and, really open up to each other about how we're feeling, then I suppose the volcano can build up. And then once that erupts, that's when I suppose you're finding the different coping mechanisms for people at home, and the results of that at times can be quite severe. So at our home, we are quite fortunate, but yes, like anyone, we have struggled in different ways. And it just shows you, everyone, no one's immune from this. Everyone's impacted in certain ways and at certain levels.
You're absolutely right, Nathan. And you spoke about Groundhog Day. What have you done to kind of mix things up a little bit at home and at work to kind of break that sense of just doing the same thing day in, day out?
I've actually become the master of marketplace, would you believe? And Gumtree and eBay. So,
and you said you weren't technically strong. That's pretty impressive.
No, that's not technical. That's probably the highest achievement I get in an online space, to be honest. But my wife and I actually had a chat. We're lucky in a way. Like, we actually live on a 1 acre property, pretty much in town up here. It's a lovely place. It's a good environment. So just there, you sort of feel like, you don't feel as clogged up, if you like, or stuck. But in saying that, though, one thing we noticed, especially for the kids, was we didn't really have enough things for activities for them to keep them occupied or to give them some outlets. And in turn, that would then give Libby and I, my wife and I, some time to actually sit together and have those sort of discussions, and those healthy chats together and a coffee and the rest of it together to help us stay healthy ourselves. So would you believe buying a trampoline online, buying a table tennis table online has been something we've done. We've also tried to create other little things to get the kids involved with. So we've got a young kitten, a pet at the moment, who's causing all sorts of trouble around the house. So all of our furniture is now stuffed. But it's been a grouping of things that we've tried to find little pieces that can support us to keep the family stimulated. That includes movie nights together, and really basic stuff that has helped us just change our normal environment that we probably did when school was there, when work was there for both of us, and we probably took it for granted.
They are some fantastic tips, and I would have loved to have been there when you were putting the trampoline together.
That's not a forte, no.
I wanted to switch the conversation, and it actually picks up on some of the things you were saying earlier, Nathan, in regards to being in the football industry and feeling like you had a really supportive workplace, and you were psychologically safe to kind of bring your whole self to work and to speak up and tell people how you were feeling. Can you tell us about a couple of the examples of both positive and negative behaviours and cultures, or things that affected you when you were kind of dealing with depression and playing football?
Yeah, I may not have explained myself well enough before when I was talking about the situation. The support is there, but for me, I never used it. So from 1997 right through till 2004, I hadn't actually spoken to anyone about needing support or seeking to find out what support was available. We did have, which I was very, very lucky at the time, we did have a psychologist at the football club who was a dedicated support person, and someone who I had been opening up to in a way, not completely, as to some of the troubles I was having. And he was a great support in helping me sort of work my way through. So that's one. But the issue for me was it wasn't until 2004 when I had a full physical and mental breakdown, to the point where it's one of those things. It's very hard to explain what it's like and where you get to, but I suppose in the end, and I use this term a little bit when I do chats, I call it the rip, you're on the parachute and it's the ripcord of life. I mean, you get to a point where, you're ready to pull the cord. And that's where I found myself, and I had a full breakdown while I was at the football club in 2004. It wasn't until then that I had one of my leaders, who was Peter Swab, who was the coach at Hawthorn at the time, and communication with him around it hadn't been great because he didn't understand. But the one thing he did say when I had the final sort of issue where I sat down with him and said, it's all over, I retire, I can't do this, I can't cope anymore. He actually gave me some of the best advice I had received up until that time, which was, to me, he goes, I don't understand what's happening, but to me, it feels like you're running away from something, and you're running away from this health issue that you've got. And from his perspective, he said, listen, mate, if you actually run away from this again and you don't deal with it now, he goes, I feel you'll be running for the rest of your life and dealing with it for the rest of your life. And from that moment, I just went, wow, what an insightful thing, which from my perspective, I understood what he was saying. And from that moment, that was when I started to look at it as an opportunity to really confront my issue and get myself back on my feet. And from there, it was then a searching environment where I'm looking for, okay, what support is out there? How can I get help from Beyond Blue? How can I get help from a psychiatrist and a psychologist? And then from there, I mean, some of the positive aspects of the AFL is at that time, once the organisation and your club realised that you're at that point of struggling, the openness to support was amazing. They didn't. They lifted every rock to find the right person to help me. Ian Dicker, our president at the time, he was the one that went to Jeff Kennett and asked Jeff, who was a major, I suppose, person in the background of Hawthorn Football Club, Jeff, what can you do? And it just so happened Jeff was involved at Beyond Blue, and that started that involvement for me. The AFL, from there, they did have an AFLPA. They did have separate confidential psychologists. And I think from that moment, what it did, it actually opened a pathway for other people in the AFL system to open up. Most clubs had support, which was great, but it allowed them to open up. And then, of course, what that meant was the AFLPA system was inundated with footballers wanting to get support, which is wonderful, and it then forced them to add more people and more options for players to get health and really push those boundaries. So that's the positivity, I suppose. The negative impact that I found was very minute at the time, which was just the way some crowds and things like that used that situation to try and get under your skin. When you're running around the boundary and you're on the bench and you can hear the voices sort of yelling out to you from opposition clubs to try and put you off your game. That's a very small negative. I just took it as, it's probably pretty standard crowd behaviour to not understand the significance of what mental health is and to try and use it as a little forum to sort of take me off my game and to sort of, as an opposition player, put me off. I sort of look at it and see it as naive, but it's not something that really affected me that much.
Thanks so much, Nathan. And if I was just picking up on a couple of the things you said, prior to your breakdown, if I was one of your footy mates or the coach, a lot of leaders or friends say that they don't recognise the signs. What would I need to recognise in you to be able to reach out and say, do you need some help or do you want to have a chat?
Yeah, and it is a very tough situation, and I think that's one of the hardest things to do is for people who are watching or seeing, for instance, me and what my behaviour is like, to pick up whether there's a problem or not. I think some of the major tell signs are a person who's erratic. If you see someone who's the life of the party, staying out the latest, always trying to impress people and those sort of things, a lot of times that's a mask. That's a mask for someone who is likely a bit insecure and is likely having a few problems or having some coping issues, which that's not necessarily depression, it's not necessarily a mental illness, but for me, that's definitely a flag that goes up. Another one, a major one, is withdrawal. So the opposite, which is them withdrawing from groups, withdrawing from sort of standard relationships, conversations, and those sort of things. And I think it's that seeing a difference in behaviour really should put the flag up to say, hey, I probably need to ask a few questions and try and find out how that person is going, what's going on in their life. And the next part to that is how do you have that conversation, and is the person who's struggling, are they willing to open up to you? And as I keep saying, there are so many challenges aligned to that. The best thing that I've always said is being consistent, and also being open and honest, because if you're willing to share a conversation with them about yourself and allow them to see you with an insecurity or you with some vulnerability, like you mentioned before, Becky, I think that allows a person just a bit more comfortability to actually be willing to talk a bit more. They may not give you everything, but they might talk a little bit more about what's going on in their life. And it gets back to the one thing, people need to understand more and more, we're all busy. We've all got a lot going on. We've all got work. We've got families. And it's something that can go missed, that someone within your team is struggling. And it's so important for the person who's struggling is to really themselves try and understand that they're not on top of their game, and that it really is the most important thing is for them to communicate and reach out, because once that happens, the help is there. Your friends are your friends for a reason. What I found was a lot of my friends, they didn't understand what I was going through. A lot of my friends said, hey, I've got no idea, but I tell you what, mate, as soon as you pick up that phone, I'm there for you. And, that's a big help when, within yourself you're feeling pretty awful and not liking what you see in the mirror.
That's some great advice to all of us. Thanks so much, Nathan. Georgie, from an employee health perspective, what role do you think managers and colleagues, coming off the back of Nathan's conversation, should play, and how do we actually create a psychologically safe workplace?
Yeah, sure. Can I just pick up on a couple of things that Nathan said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Around conversation and difficult, challenging, awkward sometimes, but actually so important, these conversations. And every single first step towards recovery from a mental health problem starts with a conversation, whether that's a conversation with a workmate, with a manager, with a stranger on the end of a helpline, or indeed a GP or a mate. We cannot underestimate the power of this human connection and these difficult, challenging, scary sometimes human conversations. Leadership communications during this time in a workplace setting, I think, are even more important than ever. And the honesty, the regularity, the candour in which we share some of the things that are on our minds as leaders. I think one of the things I've learned is that my staff don't necessarily need me to have all the answers. They just want me to be honest with them about what's going on, what it means for them, and what I need from them. And then by the same token, what do you need from us? And I think the other point I want to make about conversations is we can't always just rely or expect people who are struggling to be the ones that initiate that conversation, as important as that is. And we want to encourage people to know that, stigma is reducing. People actually get this stuff more and more and more. But, when you're actually in that place that, Nathan was describing earlier, you do everything you can to mask what you're feeling from those around you. You spend all your energy doing that. So we actually need, as friends, as colleagues, as managers, as leaders, to lean in and actually initiate those conversations and actually skill ourselves to have those conversations. So what do? We actually, you might notice in this kind of environment, if your staff are working remotely and someone's either, not engaging in the Zoom doom as much as they normally would in normal circumstances, if they're switching their camera off regularly, if they're turning up late, if they're not turning things around as quickly as they might, or indeed you can just notice things. And I think those small behavioural shifts that Nathan was talking about are really the cues. Don't bring it up in front of a group setting, but just make a time to just reach out to them and actually have a think about what you want to say. Make sure you're not going to get interrupted. Don't make it into a big deal. Just pick up the phone or jump online and just say, hey, and ask. I always find it helps to start by saying, hey, I'm having a terrible week. How are you going? Or, look, I noticed that, you were a bit withdrawn in that team meeting. Is everything going on? I know you've got kids at home at the moment. Is everything okay? Can we do anything else to support you? So just ask open-ended and start with, perhaps reflecting a little bit on yourself. And really kind of, keep probing, because some people will get closed down, some people will get angry. But I think, and in those situations, you say, look, that's absolutely fine. I just want to let you know that I'm a bit concerned about you, and I'm going to check in on you in a couple of days' time. Persistence is the key. And then if the person does open up, you just sit and listen. Don't try and solve their problems as much as it is our temptation as human beings to do that. Just knowing that someone's there listening with empathy, not judging them, and actually then just saying, okay, what can I do to help? What can we do as a team to support you? How can things look differently? Can we adjust your workload? Can we adjust your hours? Do you need some extra support? What does that look like for you? It's really important to let the person feel like they have the power and that they're actually in control and the power doesn't get taken away from them. Do everything you can to keep them at work. And what I might do is I'll send you guys afterwards, and you might want to send around to people some practical tools that we've got about how to have those conversations, how to design a really good return to work program or plan with someone, how to disclose yourself. Like if you, is this a good thing to disclose in the workplace? A kind of self-disclosure tool. So, and I think that that's what people are really craving. They want those really practical tools, advice and strategies to build their confidence to have these kinds of conversations. But you know what? We need to have them. We need to have them with our kids as well. Our kids are talking about these things. And as adults, we actually need to be a part of that conversation. I think Nathan is spot on. Communication is absolutely central to a mentally healthy workplace, community, family, and indeed at an individual level.
That's fantastic, Georgie. Thanks so much. And I think, even framing those questions for us is incredibly helpful to all of us as friends, colleagues, leaders, family members. And as you say, just opening up those conversations is so incredibly important. Looking ahead, as we return to a sense of normality, what do you see as being the longer term impact of living through this period of mental health? And Nathan, I might just throw to you.
Yeah, no problem at all. I think the biggest impact that I am concerned about, and sort of won't hide away from, is what are the ripple effects going to be for business and people once it is opened up? Because once we open up and things start to take normality, it will take a long time for normality, but how are businesses going to be placed to reopen? How are people going to be placed to retake up roles? What is going to be available for them? And then what effect does that have 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the track? Because I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that the effect of what's happened this year with COVID isn't going to be impacting for a significant amount of time moving forward as well. And I think from a business point of view and a leadership point of view, that is definitely something to be aware of. It's not just tick a box, open the doors, we're back on our feet and away we go. You still need to be aware that people are going to be challenged in a lot of different ways. Some people have cancelled, or not cancelled, but put their loans on hold. Some people have pulled money out of their portfolios to keep them afloat throughout this time if one parent has lost work. So I think there are a lot of issues that are going to arise around that, and I think it's very important for both business and leaders within business to just keep that in mind and be aware of that. For me, there is going to be quite a large ripple. Don't know how that's going to affect different businesses, but certainly as a person and a leader within my team, it will be something that I'm trying to be very aware of and continue to have the behaviours and learn from this situation to continue those behaviours of better communication, better team involvement, better interaction just around personal. Everywhere I walk in the dealership, every single person that I can stop and say hi, how's it going, without sort of interrupting their work too much. But that little effect that you can have with a bit of positivity on people around the workplace and in your business, all the small things can add up. And then if you do get a chance to get someone to open up and understand their situation, you certainly might be able to support them better.
That's great, Nathan. Really practical tips. Really appreciate that. Georgie, a quick question for you. How can we best support the return to work for employees who have been on leave and suffering from mental health issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing to really remember is that everyone's circumstances are different. So there's no kind of, one size fits all, solution. And again, it's got to be led by them. So don't be afraid, and in fact, be deliberate about having those conversations where you say, what do you need from us? Like, what does success look like for you? And we talk about reasonable adjustments in a physical return to work sense, when you've had a physical injury, and it's no different for a mental health injury. So what does a mentally healthy return to work look like from you? Do we need to adjust your duties? Do we need to adjust your hours? But then I think, create a plan with that person. And again, we've got fantastic templates that we can share with you. But one of the things you need to remember is that when someone's been unwell or is still unwell, that it's very overwhelming, and they're feeling a lot more vulnerable than usual. They might fear the privacy and the confidentiality of their information. They might feel a lack of support from people. They might fear stigma and discrimination when they return to work. Is this actually going to be held against me? Am I going to be overlooked for projects and promotions in the future? So having that really open discussion as a manager with that person and developing that plan together. And, again, that open-ended questions, how are you feeling about returning to work? What adjustments or supports will actually make it a success? How do you want us to keep in touch with you in the meantime? Is that weekly? Is that daily? Is that, and how do you want, is that a phone call? Is that online? What does that look like for you? And, even, is it okay for us to speak to your doctor, so that we can actually work together as a team to actually make sure that this is a successful return to work? And then again, regularly touch base when they are at work, and then just get that plan in place and have that plan ready for when they are, fit to return to work. And I think, but the most important and potent piece of weaponry we've got against this, I think, is again, those conversations, like talking openly about this. But letting the person feel like they're in control of their own story. The biggest barometer of a mentally healthy workplace is how your staff judge you in these kinds of circumstances. If I do disclose, what will happen to my career? If I do take time off and I come back, will I be viewed as somehow less productive or less skilled at my job? Would we feel that way if the person had cancer? Of course we wouldn't. So again, it's just really, shifting our mindsets about this. If we have these very old-fashioned views about, people being somehow damaged, or it's a personality trait, or they're somehow less good at their jobs, that they've been performing it brilliantly for years and years and years, we are losing talent. We're actually, discriminating against fantastic people, and we're actually not, building the kind of workplaces that we actually want and that reflect the community.
I think you're absolutely right. It's reflecting that community. And I really like what you say about giving that individual some sense of control of how they come back to the workplace.
Becky,
really helpful.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
I don't want to hijack the meeting. And I hope I don't steal one of your questions in finishing up. But one of the things that I think is the harder conversation, and we're talking about communication, there are a lot of businesses out there at the moment who are really struggling. And they're having to put people off. They're having to stand people down. And it's probably, at the moment we're talking a lot about personal health. And coming back to work, we're talking about personal health and people being, working from home. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, for leaders and for business is how do we communicate with people that are about to lose their job? And I think that is a huge one, and probably the biggest challenge that they face, because a person who is being stood down can walk away from a business like, what? Sorry, but we have to let you go, and that's it. A lot of business, I think, and leaders, I feel, really struggle with that situation and could do it a hell of a lot better, because a person can leave your business walking away going, do you know what? I'm a valued contributor to this business. Yes, I've been stood down, but I've been communicated to about a lot of reasons why, unfortunately, the business has to downsize. And unfortunately, that is a part of life. But they can walk away feeling a lot better about themselves rather than feeling like a piece of meat that's just been, thrown out the back door. So I think that all leaders need to take that into consideration through this time, and hopefully they have done in the past, because I know from a personal situation, we feel it wasn't done incredibly professionally, and I've seen it in the past happen that way, and it just can hurt a person's confidence and their mental health so much if companies don't get that right. It's a really important part of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, look, just spot on. I reckon it doesn't change what you have to do as a leader sometimes, and this is why we get paid the big bucks. But it's how you communicate really awful, personally confronting news that makes all the difference. People still might walk away, feeling really angry and upset, but if you've explained the why and the circumstances, and you've offered them follow-up support, and you've checked in with them, and you don't do it by email. I mean, I've heard some terrible stories about how some companies have gone about communicating this kind of news to people. You have to make it as personal as possible. And, that's what leadership's all about.
Thank you so much, Georgie and Nathan. That's been incredibly valuable insights. I'd like to now turn to a video from our group executive, Andrew Wilson, who heads up our healthcare and strategy team.
Thank you, Becky. At Medibank, we're committed to improving the health of all Australians, particularly during this challenging situation with COVID-19. It's important to take care of ourselves, our friends, our families, and our customers. Here at Medibank, we're supporting the mental health of all Australians in a number of different ways. We've expanded our employee health support line to include 24/7 mental health advice. We have a 24/7 mental health phone support for our members with hospital covers, so they can speak to an experienced mental health professional and get advice and support at any time. We donated $5 million to Beyond Blue to support their vital work looking at helping Australians with the impact of the coronavirus on mental health. And we've opened up telehealth for a range of modalities: psychology, physiotherapy, dietetics, occupational therapy. I'm really excited about the fact that we launched the Healthy Minds Hub. This provides our customers with information and resources on mental health and wellbeing, how to use their cover to get better support for their mental health, and also links to key support services. We also know how beneficial prevention programs are to mental health, and the Live Better program, which rewards you for looking after your health, and Live Better at Home, which has a wealth of content helping Australians live better at home, including a range of eat, move and feel activities. We strongly believe that corporate Australia needs to do more to support employees' health and wellbeing, and we're here to support that with a broad range of programs to support this goal. And we'd encourage you to connect with our team to see how we might best support you and your employees. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us here today to have this discussion. And I'd like to particularly thank Nathan and Georgie for their incredible insight and authentic tips and guidance. You know, I think those practical skills are incredibly helpful. And Georgie, we will take you up on that offer to get some of those toolkits. Thank you so much. And for everyone listening today, please keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending those toolkits out and a recap of this session today. Thanks everyone for your time.